Hi, my name is Samir Groya, and I'm here to talk about some of the inventions during the Sumerian era. It is believed that the Sumerians invented the sailboat, the chariot, the wheel, the plow, and metallurgy. They also developed cuneiform, the first written language. Some popular games such as checkers was also created by the Sumerians. They also created the tools for farming such as hammers and kilns to bake bricks and pottery. All in all, there have been 8 kings who have ruled over the Sumerian Empire. All the feats of the kings are recorded in a cuneiform document called the Sumerian King List. The first ruler of Sumer, according to the list, is Etana of Kish, who came to the throne early in the 3rd millennium BC. He is described as he who stabilized all the lands. Some other kings of the Sumerian Empire were Dumuzi, Gilgamesh, and Utuhegal of Uruk. The Sumerian Empire fell to the hands of Sargon the Great of the Akkadian Empire. The Sumerian language is the oldest linguistic record. It was first used around 3100 BC and ruled Mesopotamia for the next 1,000 years. It was then replaced by Akkadian around 2000 BC, but was still kept as a written language for around the next 2000 years. Writing remains one of the most important achievements of the Sumerians, among other things. This allowed for record keeping if you were a king or if you were a farmer. The oldest written laws date back to 2400 BC. They are kept in the city of Ebla, where the code of Ur-Nammu was recorded on tablets. The ancient Sumerians are given credit for the invention of government. The Mesopotamians created a government with a mix of monarchy and democracy. Sumer's kingdoms were organized into cities and states, and the kings ruled each city-state for the gods. Priests, scribes, and nobles also helped. Before 3500 BC, priests ruled Sumer alone. Sumerian priests/kings took advice from a general assembly made up of elected men. Up until 3000 BC, leaders were only elected during times of crisis, whether it be famine or war.
Alright, so here we have the Sumerians PowerPoint presentation. And the 2 slides I've done are Sumerian culture and the map of the Sumerian Empire, Sumer. So starting with culture, basically Sumerian culture is very influential, especially and still today. It's basically the first culture, or one of the first, that laid the foundation for stuff like religion and art as a staple of people's lifestyles. Here we have 2 examples of culture and art in Sumerian civilization. So we have a clay sculpture, and then we have a religious temple called the Great Ziggurat of Ur, which is Ur is a city-state. We'll see that in the map. Basically, these ziggurats were religious temples at the center of each of the city-states. They weren't really churches. They weren't really like places of worship. They were seen as a dwelling area for the Sumerian people's gods. So it's not really like today, but the idea is kind of the same. And then onto these sculpture right here. Most Sumerian art was either wall or tablet inscribings, or these sculptures like you see here created from clay. This is basically kind of unique because they usually depict Sumerian rulers, but however right here is a worshipper, so it was kind of cool to see a civilization making art of not only rulers but their civilians as well. So onto the map of the empire. This was in the southern area of Mesopotamia, so it was around like modern day Kuwait. Here you see Sumer, and this is like on kind of like the opening of the Arabian Peninsula, and then Sumer is right here. It's not very large as later empires, but here are some of the main city-states. So like city-states like Kish, Nippur, Lagash, Uruk, Eridu, and Ur, like we saw earlier for the ziggurat. So yeah, that's my 2 slides, so thanks.
Some accomplishments and interesting facts about the Sumerians. was that the Sumerians kept track of the days by the march of daylight and darkness, and of the changing seasons to know when to plant crops and when to get ready for winter. The Sumerians were the first calendar makers. They used the phases of the moon, counting 12 lunar months as a year. The Sumerians also had schools where the children learned how to read and write cuneiform. The students learned arithmetic with a number system, but their system was based on the number 10. Their next unit was 10 multiplied by 6, hence why an hour is 60 minutes long. Next is a video about the Sumerians.
Most scholars around the world agree that the ancient Sumerians were the earliest developed civilization in our recorded history. They are the culture that gave us a lot of firsts: the first kingdom and then empire, the first city-states, the first democracy, the first autocracy. They pioneered writing, schooling, organized religion, lawmaking, art, and literature. Yes, the Sumerians were the first in many areas of expertise. Who were the Sumerians? The Sumerians were a civilization that started circa 6500 BC and ended around 4100 BC. This civilization would go on to influence the entirety of the ancient Middle East, and their accomplishments and innovations echo in diverse ancient cultures such as Egypt, Greece, Rome, Ethiopia, and more. From a practical, mundane standpoint, they were a highly religious, agricultural society that put great emphasis on art, culture, and the written word. As is the case with all cultures, they developed from simpler hunter-gatherer societies based on the Bronze Age sites scattered about the area that comprised ancient Sumer. They were an innovative, inventive, imaginative people, and interestingly enough, had parallels with even modern-day societies in both positive and negative aspects of their daily lives. Where did the Sumerians live? The area where the earliest civilization lived took up the territory of southern Mesopotamia, in parts of modern Iraq and Kuwait. It is nestled between two important rivers for the region, the Tigris and the Euphrates, as well as the Persian Gulf to the southeast. Their earliest countries were numerous city-states that, depending on the time period, either dominated the region, were enslaved by other cities or even other peoples, or acted independently. Rule. From their earliest days, the Sumerian city-states actually enjoyed a level of democracy not unlike the one we have today in the Western world. Most major government positions were elected rather than hereditary, and a council made important decisions regarding critical state matters. It was only during increasing warfare between the city-states, as well as clashes with the barbaric tribes from both the east and the west of Sumer, that the need for a single ruler arose, and this was when the king, or Lugal, big man in Sumerian, would take control. An ancient Sumerian had a vast array of professions to choose from. We should differentiate between two groups. The first includes the Sumerian upper classes, and the second includes their plebes. Depending on how you were born or what you did during your life in Sumer, you could jump between these two groups. Jobs and professions. The high-class Sumerians, for the most part, were either priests, scribes, members of royalty, or minor noblemen. In terms of craftsmen, we find a wide array of professions. There were sculptors, jewelers, lapidaries, carpenters, smiths, leather workers, fullers, basket makers, builders, etc. Based on the works of ancient Sumerian scribes, these were not sought-after professions, and most children and their parents with high aspirations were encouraged to pursue academic or theological professions. Sumerian technology and inventions. Vast and diverse areas of technology, including transportation, tools, war, hunting, agriculture, and brewing, have their origins in ancient Sumer. The wheel, the pickaxe, and the different types of land and water vessels are only the tip of the iceberg. The cuneiform script is by far the earliest writing system, and it was so influential that it became widespread throughout the ancient Middle East and was even in use until around the 1st century BC, a whole 5+ millennia after its invention. Mathematics was a major part of the Sumerian schooling system. They single-handedly birthed arithmetic and geometry, largely for practical uses like measurement and accountancy. I also need to mention the first use of the lunar solar calendar, later to be implemented in cultures both east and west of Mesopotamia. Sumerian foreign policy, relations with other nations. As is the case with modern-day nations, the Sumerians' relationship with their immediate neighbors was a complicated one. There was no shortage of bloody battles, coups, hostile takeovers, hostile liberations, submissions, and destructions. However, nearly all of these groups were influenced by the Sumerians in no small way. And considering how geographically distant they were from the prominent Sumerian city-states, that speaks volumes of just how influential the first civilization of the world really was. The religion and mythology of ancient Sumerians. Understanding this particular aspect of the ancient Sumerians is of vital importance to world culture in general. And no, this is not a statement made lightly. Most of what we see in the ancient myths of Sumer either directly or partially corresponds to numerous world myths. The hierarchy and behavior of gods, the creation of man, the Great Flood, the giants, the creation myths. All of these were present in Sumerian mythology first. The Sumerians envisioned the heavens as domes made of different precious stones. Whenever a Sumerian would die, according to mythology, they would go directly to Kur. An interesting concept that is almost unique to the Sumerians is that their underworld isn't necessarily the place of eternal darkness. As the sun sets and gives way to the moon on the surface, it would actually illuminate Kur, essentially bringing daylight to it. Within the realm of Ereshkigal, the dead would be judged by the sun god Utu, and at times even his father, the moon god Nana. Those judged righteous would go on to live in bliss for eternity. Those judged unfavorably would suffer for an eternity.
This is our works cited page for all the sources we used.